Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue that wonderful book, The World's Greatest Ghost by Roger Bohr, this time actually going into chapter 3. This is a chapter that has to do with the theme associated with horrific hauntings. In fact, this is the blurb that's tied to it. Those who believe they have seen a ghost are almost always upset or disturbed by their eerie experience, though most later learn to come to terms with it. But some inexplicable encounters are much more than a mere fright in the night. These are the horrific hauntings, the macabre and grisly happenings that can drive people out of their homes, out of their minds, and even cost them their lives. Talk about a great little blurb, right? Basically gives you an idea that this theme is going to be involving not just hauntings, but those that go to level 11. Definitely something that we're going to talk about here, about several of these segments, to give my thoughts and opinions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start this chapter here. Please give me your own thoughts and opinions too, as far as each segment. The first one has to do with something called horror on a university curriculum. So here's what it states. The favorite classes of the curriculum at Camerino University, Italy, were those on the occult, held by a genuine professor of psychology, Dr. Giuseppe Steppoloni. At one of those classes in September 1950, Steppoloni introduced Maria Bocca to his students. She went into a trance and astounded them all. In the trance, Maria spoke in the recognizable voices of dead men and women known to those present. But near the end of the seance came an unfamiliar voice begging them to have mercy and listen. It said, "I was born Rosa Macellini. When I died, I was Rosa Spadoni, but my husband has died since then too. We are both in the cemetery at Castel Raimondo, a few miles from Camerino. I am asking only that you help others because the same thing can happen to them." 2 days after the death certificate was signed, I was taken to the cemetery in a deep coma and buried alive. As the students sat in shocked silence, Maria toppled to the floor in a faint. The following day, Dr. Steppolini found that there had been a Rosa Spadoni who died in the civil hospital in Camerino on September 4th, 1939. She was buried 2 days later at Castel Raimondo. There were no surviving relatives to protest against the exhuming of the body, and a small group gathered at Rosa's grave on September 13th, 1950. In addition to Dr. Steppolini and the workmen he had hired, there were pathologists from the Camerino Board of Health, 3 officials representing the Italian government, and a photographer. An hour of digging uncovered the coffin, and Steppolini himself stood in the grave to raise the coffin lid. The skeleton within lay on its back, skull turned to the left. The left arm was bent upward, with the finger bones thrust into the mouth and throat cavity. The knees were bent as if it was in an effort to force open the lid. Worse, there were parallel scratches where Rosa had tried to claw her way out of the casket. The pathologist issued a public statement which said, "How Dr. Steppolini came by this knowledge is irrelevant. We must agree with him that Rosa Spadoni was buried in a coffin when vital signs were undetectable and that she awakened in her coffin beyond human help." The next segment is called The Renshaw Coffin, Dark Secret of the Sitwells. In the Sitwell family, it is always known as the Renshaw Coffin. The famous literary trio, Osbert, Edith, and Sacheverell, heard about it when they were children, and the stories of it and its ghosts became part of their upbringing. Their famous Renshaw Hall, a gloomy Derbyshire mansion dating from 1625, was always thought to be haunted. But it was not until their eccentric father, Sir George Sitwell, decided to improve the house by altering and enlarging the central staircase that the coffin came to light. In order to carry out the work, 2 small rooms had to be demolished, one on the ground floor, one on the first floor bedroom. Sir George, who was fanatically proud of his family history, asked the clerk of works to take note of anything interesting he came across, hoping that some traces of ancient building might be found. The coffin was discovered between the joists of the bedroom floor. From its construction and the fact that it had nails rather than screws, it was presumed that it was dated from the 17th century. It was firmly attached to the joist with iron clamps. Because of the lack of space, it had never been fitted with a lid, the floorboards above it serving that purpose. The coffin contained no skeleton, but certain marks prove that there had been once a body in it. The discovery threw new light on the frightening experiences of two women who had slept in that bedroom when they were a guest over at Renshaw. The first was a Miss Tate, daughter of Archibald Campbell Tate, the Archbishop of Canterbury. She had been invited to Derbyshire in 1885 to join the house party celebrating Sir George's coming of age. In the middle of the night, she was awakened by someone kissing her 3 times. The kisses were ice cold. The room was empty. She ran to the room where Sir George's sister was sleeping and told her what happened. Miss Sitwell made up a bed for her friend on her sofa, explaining that nothing could induce her to sleep in that room, as she had once had exactly that same experience. After the party, Sir George's agent, Mr. Turnbull, came to see him about some business, and during the conversation, Sir George jokingly told the story of Miss Tate's phantom kisses. Far from being amused, the agent looked shocked. Apparently, when Sir George had generously lent him Renshaw for his honeymoon, a friend of the agent's bride had come to stay. She had slept in that same bedroom and had had the same experience. She left next morning, obviously frightened, but the Turnbulls had simply credited her with an overactive imagination. One autumn evening, a few years after Miss Tate's haunting, Lady Sitwell was entertaining a few guests in the upstairs drawing room after dinner. The room was brightly lit, and the door stood open onto a passage. She was chatting to a friend who sat on her left when she became conscious of a figure in the passage outside. Friends noticed that she seemed to be following something with her eyes. She wrote later, "I saw the figure with such distinctness that I had no doubt at all that I was looking at a real person." The figure was that of a woman, apparently a servant, with gray hair done up in a bun under a white cap. Her dress was blue with a full dark skirt. She moved with a furtive, gliding motion as though wishing to escape notice, but her arms were outstretched out in front of her as the hands were clasped. She moved towards the head of the staircase on which Sir George had worked 20 years before and disappeared. Lady Sitwell called out, "Who's that?" When no one answered, she urged her friends to find her mystery visitor, and everyone joined in a search. They were on the point of giving up when a young woman looking down into the well-lit hall below suddenly cried out, "I do believe that's the ghost." Just where the door of the old room used to be, she saw a woman with dark hair and dress, obviously distressed and in deep thought. Her figure, though opaque, cast no shadow. It moved in a gentle glide, full of sadness, and then melted away. What happened in the 2 rooms that Sir George demolished had never been discovered, and the empty coffin has kept its secret. Then there's a little mini segment that's called Lord Brom's Pact. Lord Brom struck a macabre deal with a fellow student as they discussed life after death one night at Edinburgh University. Whoever died first would appear to the other to settle the argument. The 2 friends drifted apart after graduating. Brom's friend went to India, and for years the peer heard nothing about him, but the pact was not forgotten. One day, Brom stepped from his bath, reached for a towel, and saw his college classmate sitting in a nearby chair. The peer made a note of the date in his diary, December 19th, and in his autobiography published in 1871, he wrote that shortly afterwards a letter arrived from India. His friend had died on December 19th. Next segment is called Stroll to Oblivion. David Lang vanished from the face of the earth on September 23, 1880, and has never been heard of since, apart from his ghostly voice. His disappearance on a sunny afternoon and in front of 5 witnesses remains one of the most baffling mysteries of all time. During his last moments, Lang, a prosperous farmer, was strolling across a field in front of his home near Gallatin, Tennessee. His children, George, 8, and Sarah, 11, were playing in the front of the house. His wife had just walked out of the house to greet an approaching buggy carrying Judge August Peck and his brother-in-law. David smiled, waved at the visitors, and started walking towards the group at the farmhouse. He took a dozen steps, and then Mrs. Lang's horrified scream shattered the afternoon. Judge Peck dropped the buggy reins. The two men sprinted across the field to join Mrs. Lang and the children at the spot where David Lang had last been seen. There was no trace of the farmer. In full view of 5 witnesses, he had simply vanished. His wife fell to her knees and began to beat frantically at the ground. Judge Peck lifted her to her feet, and the 5 fanned out in a frantic search of the pasture. The search yielded no sign of this missing man. The judge summoned help. Neighbors began to arrive and search parties were formed. Far into the night, lanterns were swinging across the farm and through the woods beyond. The next morning, the county surveyor arrived and inspected the area where Lang had vanished. He announced that it was firmly supported by a thick strata of limestone. There were no potholes or caves into which a man could fall. Mrs. Lang was by now numb with shock and under her doctor's care. As the search continued through days, weeks, and eventually months, she stoutly resisted any suggestion of a funeral or even a memorial service for David Lang. She asked only that all churches pray for his return. The shock of the experience had deeply affected the 2 Lang children, particularly Sarah. She turned into a shy, withdrawn child who spent long hours daydreaming. Finally, there was an astounding incident that prompted Miss Lang to take her children away from the farm. On an April evening in 1881, Sarah ran sobbing into the house to report that there was a ring around the spot where her father had vanished. When Mrs. Lang went to investigate, the child said she could clearly hear her father calling. He was begging for help in a tortured voice, but it faded away into silence. Mrs. Lang did not hear her husband's ghostly voice, but in the pasture she made a strange discovery. Where her husband had last been seen, there was a perfect circle of withered yellow grass, some 20 feet in diameter. And then there's another little mini segment that's called Ripper's Legacy. 2 victims of Jack the Ripper have returned to London's East End to remind the capital city of its most celebrated unsolved crimes. Polly Nichols, a 42-year-old prostitute, was the first of the cruel butcher's 6 victims, found with her throat and stomach cut on August 31st, 1888. She had been seen since, a huddled, pathetic figure glowing eerily in the gutter of Durward Street, Whitechapel, where her body was discovered. Harrowing screams heard in Hansbury Street in a nearby Spital Fields are said to be another of Jack's victims, 47-year-old Annie Chapman. And then one last segment here, this one titled The Race to Eternity, a Never-Ending Marathon. The day marathon man James Worson accepted a sporting challenge was the day he disappeared from the face of the earth. The proud, athletic English shoemaker screamed once and then vanished forever. On September 3rd, 1873, Worson boasted of his athletic prowess to 2 fellow townsfolk of Leamington, Warwickshire. He said that on more than one occasion he had raced from one town to another in record time. The people of Leamington knew Worson's talents as a foot racer, but his friends were skeptical. He might be as good as he thought, they told him, but could he prove it? Worson happily accepted the challenge. He would show them, he said, with a 20-mile run from Leamington to Coventry. They began the test in high spirits. Worson put on his running shoes and set out. His friends, Hammerson Burns and Barham Wise, trailed close behind them in a horse-drawn gig, Burns carrying a camera. The mood of the 3 was still festive a quarter of the way to Coventry. Worson appeared as tireless as he had claimed, running with ease and turning occasionally to exchange words with his friends. The runner was never out of their sight. Running in the middle of the dirt road, Worson suddenly appeared to stumble. He pitched forward in a headlong fall and had time for only one piercing scream. Wise said later, "It was the most ghastly sound either of us had ever heard." That terrible cry was their last memory of him. Worson's body never struck the ground. He vanished in the middle of his fall without touching the earth. The road itself provided tangible evidence of what they had witnessed. Burns's picture of the long-distance runner's tracks, clear footprints in the soft dirt, faltering and ending as abruptly as if Worson had crashed into a stone wall. When the men returned to Leamington, a massive hunt began. Searchers combed every inch of the terrain between Leamington and Coventry without success. Bloodhounds were strangely reluctant to approach the spot where Worson's footprints ended. And for years after his disappearance, there were reports of a ghostly green runner on the empty night road from Levington to Coventry. And then that's it. Let's go ahead and let's end this segment here and then talk about these experiences. And then we'll continue part 2 in another segment, in another video. So first off, what a great chapter, right? Here you have some horrific hauntings that involve some ghastly situations. First one, horror on university curriculum. What a way to go. That's one of the biggest fears that people have on a worldwide basis, is to be buried alive. Here you had this situation. Rosa Menichelli, later on Rosa Spadoni, she apparently came into the body of one of the students there at that university that was doing a seance and told them about her being buried alive. And then when they went to go actually exhume her from the ground, sure enough, there was. The skeleton was there, but there were indications that this skeleton had turned, that the arm was basically going upwards, that the knees were bent, trying to push the coffin up as well. There were scratches on the top of the casket too. What a horrible way to die. Easily, if this is one of the most, in my case too, one of the most fearful things is being buried alive or having some kind of claustrophobic situation like that. And here this poor woman had to endure that and wake up to it and then spend who knows how long, a day, 2 plus, basically in that situation. Just absolutely horrendous. Poor soul. My heart goes out to her completely. The next one, the Renshaw coffin. This one was a unique tale. Apparently there was a coffin that was stuck in between some areas there in the bedroom floor. No indications though as to who that coffin was with and what happened to that person. Like, it was just basically a ghost of a young woman that was coming out and then walking about. And when that happened, they apparently answered kind of like who that coffin was with, but no name, no indication as to what happened to that person. But it made it seem like it was a bad thing, obviously. Like this was somebody that was in distress, a ghost that was lamenting things, leading them to where the coffin was. But that was about it. Strange tale, still mysterious to me after reading it. Then there was another one. This one I have talked about, Stroll to Oblivion, David Lang. It's one of my earlier videos. It's about the guy who basically disappeared in thin air. I'm so fascinated by this tale. Still, to this very day, I'm fascinated by it. Just the idea that in full plain view, in front of his family, in front of that judge, and in front of everyone, he just outright disappeared. I mean, that is just wow. The idea that they were looking right at him and then he just disappeared. No indication again of any cave, any kind of sinkhole, nothing that would have swallowed him alive. Instead, he just outright disappeared right there. Fascinating tale. It makes you wonder, like, what happened? Was there another dimension? Was he abducted? Who knows, like, what happened there, but something occurred. And then the fact that his voice is still somewhere there as well, calling out and then trying to see, what help it can get. And then, of course, where that ring was, that it was found. What an amazing tale. Definitely something that I've talked about all those years back that I'm still fascinated with, which leads to the next one, Race to Eternity. I have not heard about this one, but you better believe I'm going to talk about it soon, probably under either Urban Legends or Mysteries and Disappearance. The fact that you had this guy here, Marathon Man James Warson, he was running between one town to another, and then throughout that experience with some friends, right then and there, taking pictures no less, they saw him trip and then right in the middle of that dirt road disappear, but not before letting out some kind of god-awful piercing scream. This is a fascinating tale too. I'm going to talk about that soon. Let me know what you guys think though about that experience. They saw him vanish into thin air right there, and the best part is the proof is right there. The proof is with those footsteps, the footsteps that were within that mud and that track, and the fact that they took pictures of it showcasing that dirt as well, and the footsteps leading to his disappearance. Definitely interesting stuff to share, so be on the lookout for that soon. All right, everybody, let me know what you guys think. Take care, everyone.